Hello, I'm Eric Singer, Gazette.com, and this is City Chat, Mayor's Vision. Welcome to the inaugural City Chat. Joining me, of course, is Mayor John Suthers of Colorado Springs, and throughout the year, we will have twice a month the mayor here and other elected leaders to talk about the vision of Colorado Springs, the problems, the situations, and the answers. We're talking about real issues, real answers, unedited, beyond the sound bites, with full statements. And thank you so much for being here, Mayor.
Eric, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And my co-host, of course, is City Government Reporter Billie, Stanton, Anleu. Thank you. And with that in mind, Mayor, let's talk about it. You've been in office more than 2 months. Let's talk about that time period. When you got in, you knew what the problems were. Now you're in, you get to see them firsthand.
I do, and I have to say, so far, no surprises. I mean, I knew that one of my first jobs was to create a more collaborative relationship with the council to improve the political environment. I think we've both been working hard at that, and I feel like we've made a lot of progress. Obviously, as I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more, we've got a strategy to deal with our infrastructure problems. And I also have worked very hard in economic development in terms of trying to promote new job creation in the private sector. I think the only surprise is how much time I spend, dedicating new taco buenos and things like that.
Well, with that in mind, you were talking about infrastructure. Let's talk about a key part of what you campaigned on and also what you talked about on your first day after you were sworn in, potholes. Some roads have been rebuilt, some potholes, 60,000 plus, we did a story recently on that, have been plugged. But how many more can we expect to see done before winter sets in, and how much more money do we have to do this work for this fiscal year?
Well, we're averaging, since the start of summer, since June 1st, we're averaging about 1,400 potholes a week filled. We'll continue that pace until until cold weather comes, probably through about 1st of October. And we do have enough money to do that. One of the good pieces of news is that the PPRTA funding, a portion of which goes to road maintenance, because of increasing sales tax revenues, is a little higher than projected. So we do have the money to continue that pothole filling. But what people have to understand, Eric, is that filling potholes is short-term remedies. The problem is, the reason we have these potholes is we've got rapidly deteriorating roadways because of their age and lack of maintenance. And we have to move beyond just pothole filling, get to resurfacing, and in some cases reconstruction of the roads themselves.
All right, you jump into the next question I was going to have that specifically talks about this. To a certain degree, there is a feeling of planned obsolescence, not on your part, not on the city's part, but just by the nature of things, the freeze-thaw cycles when it comes to roads. Are you looking, and is the City Streets Division looking at new technologies so that we don't just patch things, we actually look forward and say, this road is going to be okay for 5 or 10 years?
We're obviously attentive to whether there's any new technologies developing nationally that have been tested. But frankly, while there's some little differences in the asphalt mix, there's not a lot of new technologies in the asphalt environment. Obviously, if you go to cement, it lasts longer than asphalt, but it costs 3 times as much. So what we need to do is have enough money to do proper maintenance during that average 10-year cycle of a road, chip and seal about halfway through, and make sure that you're filling cracks so that we can extend the life. Right now, 60% of our roads are in that beyond the 10-year cycle and degrading rapidly. We need to deal with that, do a lot of resurfacing, do a lot of maintenance, chip and seals and things like that, and get to the point where we've got a lot fewer percentage of our roads that are in poor condition.
Now, speaking of the roads, we're talking about infrastructure, just one piece of the puzzle. But the one thing that comes to mind, and this is when I first arrived here in 1988, and actually, I feel old, and you look so young, still the same, and I actually interviewed you when you won for El Paso County DA for your first term. And what was interesting to me when I first arrived here, something that was not done here and still has not been done to this point, has been done in so many other cities across Texas and across the country, Lubbock, Texas, Abilene, Texas, much smaller communities, a loop around the city. We can't get an east-west corridor too many people arguing about property. They don't want it near their house. But that circle around the community to de-stress I-25.
Well, the most likely version of that would be an I-25 bypass that would go east and around. And that is not something that Colorado Springs could afford. It would have to be a federal highway program, a lot of state DOT interest in it. Quite frankly, Eric, one of the major issues in the United States right now, infrastructure is not just a local problem. The federal gas tax, which hasn't been, I think, raised since 1980, brings in a lot less money because of fuel efficiency. Plus, you combine the fact that road construction costs have outstripped inflation about 2 to 1 in the last 15 years. There's not a lot of money in federal highway building. So I would not suggest that any kind of a I-25 bypass is on the books anytime soon.
So ultimately, when we're talking about potholes and we're talking about roads, if you had to tell the city right now in a sentence, what are we looking for in the next 6 months, a year, 2 years?
Well, I think the council next week is going to approve going to the ballot on a 0.62 sales tax for 5 years only to go exclusively towards road improvement and repairs. That would produce about $50 million a year for 5 years, $250 million. That would go a long way towards getting us back in the ballpark in terms of reducing the percentage of poor roads to a reasonable level.
All right, my colleague Billie Stanton Anleu, city government reporter here at the Gazette, has some insightful questions, and I know you've got some insightful answers as well.
I hope so.
All right.
Mayor, I know that you are very well aware of the stormwater issue, and I believe you and Council President Bennett have been to Pueblo 4 or 5 times?
I've been down there 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I spoke this morning with members of the County Commission and of the City Council, and they both are very hopeful that an intergovernmental agreement will come to pass and that Colorado Springs is serious about keeping its commitment on the stormwater front. But as you know, the Lower Arkansas District is looking at filing a federal complaint that we violated the Clean Water Act by not taking care of our stormwater problems. And I wonder if you have concerns about that, if you've been working with that district, if you have any news on that front for us.
Billie, the issue with both the county commissioners and the southeast Arkansas district are basically the same. Their problem with Colorado Springs is that we had a stormwater enterprise that produced about $15 million a year. That would go to stormwater projects, and the voters and the council defunded that effective in 2010, and we haven't had a set fund that goes to stormwater enterprise. What the council and I are trying to do at this point is to negotiate an intergovernmental agreement by which we would commit to a stormwater fund of a minimum of $19 million a year for the next 10 years that would go to stormwater projects. In essence, replace the old stormwater enterprise at a level that has an inflation factor in it. I'm pleased to hear that the council and the Pueblo County Commissioners, which are ultimately the party that we're negotiating with, because they issued what's called a 1041 permit for the Southern Delivery System. I think, believe that this is a good faith offer and negotiating seriously, and we got teams of lawyers working on that. Well, that's the complaint of the Lower Arkansas. They appear to want to sue. Their suggestion is that stormwater become a 5th utility.
Yes.
There's a lot of issues there, and I don't know all of them, but there's some legal complexities that impact with the amount of indebtedness that utilities has for the Southern Delivery System, how that would impact debt holders, bond holders and things like that. And the other thing that I think is a practical reality, you could not do that as a 5th utility without asking the voters. Do you want to make it a 5th utility? All I'll say is if we get sued, we're going to vigorously defend it. And we think we have very good defenses from a stormwater, water quality perspective. We've been spending about $3 million a year towards compliance under what's called MS4 permit, dealing with water quality. And I just, to the extent we get sued, we're going to vigorously defend those suits, but I think everybody would be better off sitting down and trying to resolve it out of court. I frankly understand why they, you know, there's some trust issues, but I can tell you that the council and I are working in very good faith trying to resolve these issues.
Okay. Jay Winter, I think his stance is that the council changes, politicians come and go, but utilities has an excellent staff and makes good decisions and would be, from his viewpoint, for the lower Arkansas, of course, would be a better choice for handling the stormwater.
Yeah, that's all well and good, but I think there's two things you got to deal with. Number one, does utilities want to do stormwater? If they don't, that's a big problem. And number two, do the ratepayers want them to do stormwater? And those are realities that have to be dealt with. And as I say, we're going to do our best to resolve these issues short of litigation, but we'll be prepared to defend the city's interests if it goes to litigation.
Thank you.
Now, you were also, we're also focusing on another aspect that Billie has been doing a lot of investigations on the City for Champions. We've talked about that for more than a year. Go ahead, Billie.
Yes, there seems to be some concern in the public that they've been concerned, as you know, all through the campaign. This was an issue that kept coming up about the stadium, and that someone would try to sneak it into existence. You know,
I don't know how you sneak a stadium into
well,
existence.
Behind closed doors, there'd be these
okay.
maneuvers. And when the Urban Renewal Authority document was signed, making the city kind of the placeholder, the entity that would be able to receive the tax dollars, you know, until a real entity is formed, people got even more worried about the prospect of this stadium happening. And it has a number of opponents, as you're aware.
Yeah.
And so can you clarify for us what is going on with the stadium?
When the State Economic Development Commission approved the City for Champions projects, there's 4 distinct projects. In addition to a potential downtown stadium arena, there's the sports medicine program at UCCS, there's the U.S. Olympic Museum in downtown Colorado Springs, and there's moving the Air Force Academy Visitor Center to I-25 and accessible to I-25 traffic. There is a state TIF, tax increment financing, that comes from the state sales tax. This is not any burden on the local taxpayers. And what happens for these projects to move ahead, and 3 of them are ready to move ahead, we had to have entities to receive the TIF money as it became available, and the first check came in, you know, a couple weeks ago. And we had to have 4 entities that could receive that money. To do that, because there isn't an identified group now that's in charge of a downtown stadium arena, we designated the Urban Renewal Authority simply to receive those funds. By them receiving the funds, there's no commitment to a stadium.
Actually, the city was designated to receive the funds, not the URA.
Well, that's not my understanding. And I
was there when they voted.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm the guy that signed it, and I thought that the URA was the receiving entity on behalf of the city. That's how I thought that the mechanism was. But the fact of the matter is, there's no commitment to go forward by the receipt of those funds. We had to have some place to put the funds to preserve for the next 10 years, actually now we're about 7 years, the possibility of that stadium arena coming to fruition. This allows the other 3 projects to move ahead. They've got the money, they're moving ahead.
Okay.
Now, what needs to happen in terms of a potential downtown stadium arena? I think what has to happen first is a privately funded, not city funded, but privately funded study to relook at what the possible financial viability of such a program is. Who would use it? How could it be privately financed and things like that? I think that's going to happen in the next couple of months. I think there's enough entities, and I suspect some organization, whether it's the Colorado Springs Sports Corp or what, would be the entity that would, with the funding, go ahead and do this viability study. Then it's a matter of, if the recommendation is that there's enough private money to go into it, which in combination with the state TIF money could build it, should we go ahead? If the recommendation is it can't be done without Colorado Springs taxpayer support, then that any level of support would have to go to the voters. I think there'd be a threshold decision whether we either wanted to ask them, and then there would be ultimately their decision whether they wanted to invest in it. But contrary to some assertions that there's some sneakiness going on, there are no commitments been made by simply setting up an entity to receive the funding.
Okay. If you did have some groups come together who are really behind this idea and want to see it happen, would the city not be liable for the infrastructure, for any road changes, any parking areas?
It depends. I mean, it depends how it's structured. Would they the private entities do infrastructure around it, or frankly, if private entities funded the stadium or arena and all the city had to do was some curb and gutter and stuff like that, that'd be a heck of a deal for the city. Yeah. We just don't know whether there's any private interests out there that are willing to invest in that kind of situation. I think it has a lot to do with who would use it. Let's face it, unless you've got 150, 200 nights of use a year, it's going to be very tough for anything to be viable from a financial standpoint.
So ultimately to the taxpayers, if you had that moment to tell them, no taxpayer money will be used in this project, much like it was in previous projects in previous administrations where there was a lot of anger because ultimately the city of Colorado Springs had to bear with some money. If you had to talk to them now.
Well, I'm talking to them now, and I'm telling everybody that before there's any city financial commitment to this, the voters would have a chance to weigh in. I'm absolutely committed to that. I think all the council members are absolutely committed to this. But people need to sit back and see whether there's a way of privately financing something like that. And if people want to put their neck on the line and privately finance it, and the ultimate liability is not the city's, more power to them. But what they can rest assured is, as long as I'm mayor and this particular council, there's not going to be a city investment in a stadium downtown arena without a vote of the people.
I'd say that was pretty clear. Now, one thing, because we're starting to run out of time, but we still have a lot of issues, and I know you have a lot of answers. Something that we were talking about is about what may be perceived as a police department using excessive force. We've done a couple of stories on that, several stories on that. Individual incidents. No one has been killed by police on your watch, but what is being done to address this perception? Because remember, these are only a few stories that we did. The day-to-day, rank and file, we have not done stories that it's excessive force.
Well, look, here's what you have to keep in mind. This is how you prevent excessive force in a department. Number one, you hire the right people, have high qualifications. Number two, you train them correctly. On those two scores, I have a high level of confidence in the Colorado Springs Police Department. Why is that? Well, among other things, for 10 years I was chairman of the Police Officer Standard and Training Board in Colorado. I know the Colorado Springs Police Department in relation to other departments. We have high standards in recruitment. We train well. We're one of 5% of police departments that have the top accreditation. This is a good police department. Now, the other thing you do is you hire to the extent possible to reflect the community, so that your police force represents the community. You have an appropriate level of minority influence in terms of the police department and all that sort of thing. So that's what you do in preparation. Then if there's an incident, you properly investigate it. The police department investigates, outside agencies, if there's an allegation of possible criminal wrongdoing, the district attorney, and impose appropriate consequences. If somebody's violated the law, you hold them to task for it. If they've violated department policy, you hold them accountable for that. That's something that I'm going to take a very hard look at. I do have a high level of confidence in who we're hiring, how we're training them, the department policies. But I'm going to take a look at, what kind of discipline's being meted out. And I may have some law enforcement experts kind of take a look at that issue also. I just want to make sure everybody's being held properly accountable. But of this, I'm sure. In this post-Ferguson world, there's this kind of this notion that there's lots of police brutality out there and things like that. We do not have a systemic or cultural problem. There are police departments who you can make a case historically have cultural issues. I am quite confident that's not our problem. We just have to deal with individual bad apples. And when you have 684 uniformed officers dealing in confrontational situations with people all the time, highly drunk, obnoxious people, sometimes acting dangerously, you're going to have these kinds of incidents. And to the extent that the police are acting improperly, we got to hold them accountable for it.
And that would be that message to your taxpayers right now?
Absolutely. We will, to the extent that their actions are costing the taxpayers dollars, we need to make sure that those people aren't, continuing to do that, that proper discipline's meted out, and that really bad apples are terminated.
At this moment, you have your opportunity to be able to talk to the people who are watching right now to wrap it up so that way you can get your vision across for the next 6 months to a year or whatever you deem.
I said in my inaugural address, if you will, at the swearing in that, to kind of paraphrase Ronald Reagan, I want to continue to build a shining city at the foot of a great mountain. And I want to help build a city that matches our scenery. Let's face it, we live in an absolutely beautiful community here. You can't beat it. And what we've got to do is do what we can do in terms of economic growth, in terms of developing our infrastructure, so that the city itself is worthy of this incredibly beautiful surroundings that we have. I start out with 3 priorities: changing the political climate. I feel very good about the progress we're making there. The voters are ultimately going to have a lot of say in November, the extent to which we're going to be able to deal with the infrastructure issues. I am spending every waking hour promoting Colorado Springs. I think we're going to have some good announcements coming up in terms of private sector expansion in Colorado Springs. I think the economy's improving. Some things are happening at the airport. Some things are happening downtown. I feel very good about our future in Colorado Springs here.
All right, thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you.
And
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching too. This has been City Chat exclusively on Gazette.com. The Mayor's vision, real issues, real answers, unedited, beyond the sound bites. And we'll be talking with the Mayor and other elected leaders twice a month here on Gazette.com. I'm Eric Singer, your host, Gazette.com, and thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.